My name is Wallace Smith, and I serve as senior pastor at First Baptist Church of Overland Park, Kansas. Um, what do I do? Maybe it's the best I can do is herd the cats, right? We're trying to keep people together. Um, my role here is, I think, to be a shepherd, to be a guide, and I don't pretend to be some person with all the degrees, but someone who is a fellow human being who is just walking alongside others as we seek to be good disciples of Christ. This church dates back to 1914 in terms of history and was in old downtown Overland Park. So it's one of the original churches in Overland Park, Kansas. And over the many years, shifted and changed, moved to this location in between 1968 and 1971. And it was just sitting right on the southern edge of a growing Kansas City metropolitan area. That in fact, these neighborhoods were brand new, and just to the south of here were literally corn and wheat fields, like old farms. For this particular context, we're living in a neighborhood and trying to be a neighborhood church. And that has shifted in the last 4 or 5 years while I've been here in terms of just trying to find out who our neighbors are and recognizing that this was a very different neighborhood when the church moved to this location and built this particular building. This was a kind of the white suburbs of Johnson County, Kansas. And over the last several decades, that continues to shift outward. And this is a neighborhood that maybe has shifted generationally, where an older generation is now moving out of homes in this area. They're more modest starter homes for new families. And what we're finding is more ethnic diversity in our current context that's just around us. How do we maybe open ourselves to that? And one of the ways we've done that is simply kind of what I inherited was a ministry team, a staff that was actually already kind of ethnically diverse. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is people that came before me that were already doing this on our team. So again, a small church, but we have 5 people on our ministry team, and 4 of the 5 are part-time, bivocational, and then I'm the full-time pastor. And but on our team, we had 2 people that came first as Central Seminary students. They came here for their seminary internship, but like years ago, they stayed on staff. And so Daphne Braswell, our associate pastor, is African-American female. Another one is Shinwon Park. Our minister to children and youth is Korean. William Brewer is our worship pastor, and he teaches in inner city high school in Kansas City, and is African-American. And then Alex Velasquez is our sanctuary director, and he actually started here as because his girlfriend was in the youth group, and Alex could play some instruments. That's kind of how he got connected to the church, and he stayed on through college and then beyond, and has continued to evolve in his role, and now is sanctuary director. So we have this little diverse team that just kind of happened. Now that's our greatest asset, and that's a great gift. And again, because we've created this team, and it wasn't because we just went on purpose, we're going to hire diversity. We had the diversity kind of happen, and now we're trying to make that an intentional focus in terms of how we utilize that asset. And we're starting to reflect that, and then we're seeing that people see their reflection in us, and in how we are working together and what we're finding together. We literally have had people who have come to this church because they found us online and saw that we were maybe doing something different than what they've seen in the past, and their openness to that, to exploring that, has helped us. And so that natural diversity that is on our team is now starting to be reflected in the makeup of the congregation. So a culturally competent team, and maybe how we function as a team. To be honest, one of our challenges, because everyone's bivocational, is finding time to be together. Actually, to sit down on a time that's other than Sunday morning is really challenging. So I had this vision that we're always going to be together and, working through the problem together. And in fact, in the office, I took off the senior pastor label on the door, and it's just the office. And then I got rid of the big desk and put in a dining room table. So it's like the Knights of the Round Table, kind of a space, a co-working space. And that with the idea that we're going to come together and really do this work as like the Justice League for this church, that kind of a thing. The reality is it's really hard to get together, and to not just relegate things to email and phone calls and texts. So one is making time to be together. Um, and so that's just simply the challenge of does it always function? No, because we can be so busy that we get distracted. So we have to sit down and maybe plan out several months at a time. Well, where it gets messy, again, I would refer to, um, we never have enough time. We want to be intentional. We do trust one another. We trust the team, right? And we think that we've got real potential here, but where it gets messy is when we don't have time. We haven't had a chance to check in with each other. We know that this person over here who has an issue maybe has talked to one of the staff people and assumes then that everyone on the team knows what's going on, and we don't, because we kind of we haven't had time to relay that message. Um, so that means that we're not always on the same page. I think we are on the same page in the big things, but just in terms of daily, weekly maintenance of the ministry, that's where it can get challenging. You trust each person to kind of take care of their area, but you don't want to silo that. You don't want to stay separate from one another. We really have to work at coming together, making more than just a few minutes on Sunday morning to check in. And sometimes that can be staff meetings, but even that, again, it's hard to get a regular rhythm to do that. And I think that's probably the messiest spot for us. I actually begin by speaking to where I come from. My perspective on something is something I can speak to. I can't actually, I don't have, I can have empathy to, someone else's perspective or where they come from or listen to their story, but I don't actually live in their shoes. And so I can speak to what my background and my upbringing, and that's where I bring integrity to that. But I also work really hard with our team to see if we can have a diversity of voices. We've increased in terms of like where our associate pastors speak more, preach more, and it's really healthy for me to take a step back and create that space with them, or with our associate pastors, having dialogue sermons where we have two different perspectives or three different perspectives, and we all come together and work on that together. At least in check-ins, especially with William and Daphne, the three of us are the primary preachers. Uh, and being sensitive to uh, them bringing their own perspective, and even their own tradition and cadence in voice and theological differences among our team. We have a kind of a different uh, base of language, sometimes kind of our vocabulary, as well as a variety of theological understandings. And I, again, think that that's actually a greater asset than it is a hindrance, that you might hear very different perspectives from the pulpit here. And that's actually a part of the mosaic. That's part of the point, is that we have a diversity of opinion, and you might resonate more with Daphne than with me. You may, uh, that's actually healthy for us, that we're still coming together at this welcome table. The second thing is, I think, how you source your material, right? I speak from my perspective as a white male from Middle America. Um, but I can listen to and look for other voices. So whether it's in my preparation and interpretation commentaries and listening to other voices, make sure that I'm actually trying to expand my vision and perspective by hearing maybe marginalized voices and looking for sources that might reflect the multicultural aspects of our congregation. And then the second is by listening, right? And talking to the people themselves and learning from them. And even in our conversations with the ministry team, saying, how do you hear this? And that takes intentionality, and it takes time and trust to do that. Sometimes on a given Sunday, you don't have that much time. We have to be ahead of ourselves in order to really prepare that with intentionality. What doesn't change? I think we try to find a core, kind of our core tenets in the gospel. Now, that is shaped by our education in that and by our own experience of that. Maybe it's how I grew up in faith has affected, and maybe that's evolved over time. But I try to have something that doesn't change in terms of core tenets about the gospel of Jesus Christ and what I understand to be true about Jesus, his own context, whether it's cultural context, the historical times in which he was in ministry, and who the people were that were listening to them, and how their world shaped their worldview and their theology. And so, if you understand that, and we then hold up kind of some gospel truths, whether it's simply love of God and love of neighbor as a beginning point, then that's something that's really easy to say and really hard to do. Something like as unchanging as love your neighbor. Now, when your neighbor changes, and when you don't choose who your neighbor is, and when someone is different than what you see in the mirror, how are you going to be loving to that person? You know. So you try to find that core that is true, but it doesn't change, and that's what we center ourselves on. And then the second is that all are welcome at this table we share, our communion table. If that's true, if all are welcome, then what does it mean to make all welcome? And that's where the hard work begins. And that the kind of work may change, but the value is the same. Cultural competency. I don't know if I could ever be truly competent in that. Maybe, certainly culturally aware, culturally open, culturally sensitive, and seeking to, first of all, one, to listen to others, no matter who that human being is, and finding a way to learn about who they are and to respect a person's dignity and worth and agency, no matter who that is. And so that may include understanding a little more about ethnic diversity or cultural background or historical context. It may also include learning how to translate the gospel into the language of the changing culture. Middle schoolers may speak English, right, words, but they're very different words than what you or I may understand. So we have to do some work to have a conversation. So generationally speaking, that's one kind of cultural competency. And we're seeing a global context even in our politics and in our daily life, in this particular version of the world that we live in. And you can see where people can struggle with that. Some are more open to it. How do we in the church context wrestle with that? I think we simply begin one by like we said, kind of showing respect and recognizing the dignity and worth of another, and that may simply start by listening to one another and being open to what each other brings to the table. One of the things I learned when I came to this church was the church would say, and I think the church believes, the congregation believes that they are a welcoming congregation, that they are friendly. I think that's true. I think it's absolutely true once you come inside the building. If that makes sense. That's true of a lot of churches where their perspective is they're really nice because they enjoy being here and they pour the bad church coffee and they have their time. But then you don't realize that you may be a closed system. Maybe it's hard to come inside. Is there a cultural moat around the church, and what are your bridges that cross over that gap that might help people feel welcome on the inside? The second part of that welcome and hospitality thing is what you do on the outside, right? How are you a neighborhood church? Do we know the names of the neighbors across the street that actually live in this neighborhood? Are any of our people from the neighborhood? That's a great question to ask. Like, if we say that we love our neighbor, if we say that we're welcoming, what have we done to actively engage in that? This particular church, many of the ways we've done that recently is through use of our space by inviting the Sylvan Grove Neighborhood Association uses our building now as a meeting space. Or there's a knitters group that comes in once a month and they use our space. We have partnerships with two different private schools near us in terms of how they might use our space that otherwise might sit empty on on a given weekday, there's outside groups that use the space itself. And then it's in our relationships wherever we find ourselves. So if we were telling someone, how is it that you're reflecting discipleship and the love of Christ and love your neighbor when you're at your everyday ordinary job, right? When you're on a Tuesday somewhere else, how is that a reflection of your own discipleship? It's not about church growth. It's not about getting people to come here, that kind of thing. It's actually about how do we simply resonate and reflect the light of Christ in the world. So whether it's the role of the church, the responsibility maybe even of the church to help the congregation be culturally competent. So I brought with me a visual aid, and this is it's one rendition. It's a quilted version of our church logo. And that was actually quilted by our former pastor here, Jessica Williams, who served here before me. And but we have various forms of this, and it does look a bit like a mosaic, first off. And it's similar to the stained glass you may see around us in terms of kind of a mosaic style of stained glass, where these different blocks. What I see in that is one, a diversity of people. It kind of, to me, it looks like little humans kind of radiating outward, and but also it's like there's a mosaic of diversity in that. But in mosaic art, the tile work like that, it's really a bunch of individuals, right, that make up a whole picture. And the picture itself is not in any one of the pieces, but it's only when it comes together. That's when I think about mosaic, right? Then that's a wider reflection, and there's a depth and a diversity to that reflection. And so I can use that that image of many different people who keep their individual beauty, their individual aspect, but only together do we make something that's greater than ourselves, right? And so when we do that, that's, I think, the job of our work as a church. If we are one small reflection of the kingdom of God, this can be our teaching lab of how to love our neighbor. What happens when the person on that side of the sanctuary doesn't get along with this person, right? Can we still love our neighbor? Can we come together at that common table, the common union of our worship together? Are all people welcome? And that welcome may mean that you welcome people who have a different, they vote differently than you. They have a different worldview than you do. Can they still be welcome in the same space? How is it that we then work together? That just simply goes back to our very, very basic, unchanging tenet and value of love God, love one another, love neighbor. So yeah, that's our job. One of the ways we do that is through reminding ourselves of who we are, seeing our reflection in the gospel and in one another and in the stories we tell. As simple as from sermon illustrations where I use images of people who look very different from the people in the room. That's on purpose, right? And then we start to see our reflection in the lives of other people. And then it's as simple as the unintentional ways that we intersect our lives, starting with a cup of coffee or a Bible study and moving out into the everyday life that we each live, maybe separate from one another. And then when we come back together, we are renewed again. We refocus and we recharge and we worship together, and then we are sent back out to serve.